Hi, I am Lisa Gonzales, and I am the Chief Business Officer here in Mount Diablo Unified. I'm doing a special additional Ask the CBO this week to explain a little bit about the offer that many have been talking about, because I know there have been some questions, and I'm hoping that this video assists with some of the clarity. So the purpose of this video is really just to explain some concepts and then take a look at some of the numbers. So to start with, we're going to take a look at what the requirements are of Assembly Bill 1200, the sequencing of school district budgets, what a Me Too clause means in Mount Diablo, the difference between an on-schedule and off-schedule increase, as well as the difference between the proposals and how it would impact our budget, as well as contingency language. So to start with, Assembly Bill 1200 came about around 1991. It's when the legislature really decided to step in. It was intended to prevent school district bankruptcies, but it's not just school districts. Cities have to do the same exact AB 1200. And so from our standpoint, it really requires us to take a look at the impacts of any negotiations. So if there is a monetary value to any negotiations, we are required to discuss that and disclose that to our school board. Once our school board understands that, we're then required to send it to our county office of education well before the board would be voting on something like that. So the county office has to look at it. They've got to understand the numbers. They give us the thumbs up that they understand it. And then we take it back to the public. The board votes on it in an open meeting, and we have to disclose the impact financially of that negotiation. So that's pretty much the process. It's sort of the back end that we know as school leaders we have to work with. I want to also talk about the budget cycle, because we're kind of in a precarious situation right now because of the timing. So this is what a school district budget cycle looks like. Our budget cycle starts in about June. It goes all the way through June or July, but really there are all these things that are taking place, and there's actually multiple years worth of work at the same time. So back in June of last year, our school board, they adopted a budget, but they adopted a budget based on assumptions in the state budget that come after we're required to approve our budget, which means that we had to do a 45-day budget revision. We expect this year we will likely need to do another 45-day budget revision, because we make our assumptions and then the state changes things. And then what happens is in September, there's something called the unaudited actuals. And that's when we take a look back at the prior school year, and we're able to say, okay, we've closed our books, we've balanced everything out. This is what we spent in all these different categories. And then we move into the first interim, and it's a one-day snapshot on October 31st of exactly where we were with all of our budgets. So then we stop it on that day. We basically look at all of our numbers. We then present that in about December. It's called our first interim report. In January, the governor comes out with his budget message. So he just did that. And we're just beyond that, but we're not quite to second interim. So we're actually trying to close our books and work with all of our departments right now. So we are often sharing numbers that are talking about the first interim, even though the governor's budget message may have some things that are different. But in any case, the second interim will be presented to our school board and the community on March 9th. And then in the meantime, there's something that comes up shortly after that in May. It's called the governor's May revisions. And that's where the governor goes back and he said, okay, what I said in January, some things have changed. And then what we do is we all change all of our budgets and we make adjustments based on what he says in May. And then the legislature doesn't vote until June to decide if they want to take his revisions or they want to make changes. So the timing isn't ideal for us, but that's what it looks like. And then we will get ready for, and we will do our estimated actuals in June. We will adopt our budget after being real public at 2 different meetings in June. And so this is really what it looks like. So again, that red arrow right there is where we are today, February 18th. We're getting ready for second interim. We have something in Mount Diablo that's called a Me Too clause. We have Me Too clauses with our bargaining groups. We've got 5 different bargaining groups. And the way that it works is MEDIA, the Mount Diablo Educators Association, if our teachers receive a salary increase, because we have Me Too, it means that it applies to the other groups. So for example, if one group decided that they were going to settle on a salary, and let's say they were going to settle at 2% for this year, and then MEDIA settled for 3%, the groups would receive that additional amount between the 2 and the 3%. So that's pretty much how it looks. But the reason that this is important is because with a Me Too clause, we can't just look at numbers for one group. We always have to look at the numbers for all the groups. Why? Because when we submit AB 1200, we are specifically asked if you have bargained and have a settlement with one group, does it apply to all the rest? We have to say yes because of Me Too. So we have to share all the numbers of the impacts for every group, every bargaining group in the district. There's a concept that's called on and off schedule salary increases. And so just briefly wanted to touch on that. Off schedule is something that in the business world might look like a bonus, but there's really a one-time impact to that. We don't call them bonuses, we call them off schedule. And it impacts the budget for 1 year. So for example, last year, through some of our COVID dollars, we gave a one-time $1,500 off schedule. It means that it happens one time, it affects 1 year, and that's it. An on schedule means that every year you get that additional amount. So for example, if I gave you 3% this year, you get 3% on top of your salary. And then next year you get that same 3% plus whatever might increase year after year. So it increases and it impacts the budget every year. And that's one of those things that we take a look at. And that's why when we're in negotiations, sometimes we'll look at off schedule and we'll look at on schedule based on the amount of money that we have available. So right here, all I want to do is I want to just pull up exactly what has been shared with the community and just briefly go through. And here's one of the things you can do with a video. You can stop it. You can also go down to the very bottom of YouTube and you can click on the link that it tells you exactly where you can find this presentation if you'd like to spend more time with these slides. But what we're doing is our initial proposal was for 3% in this school year, but not taking effect until January 1st, 2.5% on schedule in the second year, 1.5% on schedule in the third year. So you take the 3, the 2.5, the 1.5, and that becomes 7% on schedule. When we take a look at all those costs, it's approximately $28.9 million to the district's budget. And it is over 3 years. Our final proposal was 3% on, but what we said was we're going to go back to July 1st. So it's 3% for the entire year plus 3% off schedule. So that's a one-time, kind of like a bonus. And then 2.5% and then 1.5%. But what's important is we also added something called contingency language, and I'll explain that in a couple more slides. And in the next slide, you'll see what the fiscal impact of this is. MEDIA's initial proposal was 7.5% on schedule back to July 1st, which means each year you're getting the 7.5, 3.5% next year, 1.5% the year after that, which is 12.5% on schedule. The 3-year cost of that initial proposal to the district is approximately $81.8 million. So I've got some arrows there so you can see the numbers, but the next slide, what you're going to see is I'm going to total what the final proposal was. And then I'm going to explain the contingency language. So here in the third year, not only did we have the 7, and I'll just show you right back here again, not only did we have the 7% on schedule ongoing, but then what we did was we're looking at additional amounts here in that third year that can increase it even more. Excuse me. I'm going to go back to the 10%. 10% increase over the 3 years. You see that right here. Right? So here's your 10 with the potential of 3% more. The total cost of this is $48 million to the district. So it's the original $48 million from everything that's added up. That's the cost of the 10%. Plus there is the potential of $8.3 million more dollars, which means the total potential impact would be $56.5 million to the district budget. Now, I just want to explain the contingency language. So what the contingency language says is that in the third year, because we're always budgeting for 3 years, so it's the year where we've offered 1.5%. In that year, if our multi-year projection shows that we are going to get revenue, and the revenue numbers are from a formula that the state creates for us, if we were to have funds beyond $290 million, there would be an additional 1% if that projection increased by 3.5 million. Basically, in a nutshell, what this is saying is, if the state decides it's going to give us more money in that third year, we would be passing it on, and we are putting that language in now. If the additional amount is 7 million or more, you see that in the next box down, we would be providing an additional 2%. If it's 10.5 million or more, we would be adding on an additional 3%. That would be for all of our groups. It would be part of AB 1200, and it would be on schedule, which means it becomes a permanent part of the salary schedule. So that's what these three look like, but there is contingency language or 3 triggers that would affect that. And so what I wanted to do is quickly explain the 3 factors. Those raises or increases would take effect if 3 things happened, because these 3 things are what would allow us to obtain the extra money to pass on to our employees. The first one has to do with average daily attendance. If our average daily attendance, that's one of the markers that we use. Now, it's important to note that this marker is not calculated by the fiscal department. The way that average daily attendance is monitored is that every day a student comes to school, a teacher in a classroom takes attendance. Middle school, high school, multiple periods, no problem. It's verified by the office staff. So for example, if someone forgets to take roll, somebody in the office will go back and say, hey, can you please take roll? And all of this information is uploaded to the Department of Education. We have an individual who works in the fiscal department who looks at the data, and all of a sudden, if there's a big dip in a school, he might go back and check that. But for the most part, that information uploads straight to the state of California, and it is very, very closely monitored and audited by our auditor. Our auditor is from Crow. We just had an audit. That audit was without any findings, and he goes heavily into attendance to find out if we're doing anything inappropriately. So that's how that trigger works. The second one has to do with the numbers related to a 3-year rolling average of a specific group of students. It's our homeless, foster, free and reduced meal English learners. No one in the fiscal department is able to manipulate any of these numbers. It is data that comes from parent input into our ARIES system about, their status, or when they originally register their students for school, they designate whether they are or are not English learners, and then we test them to find out if they are or are not. Free and reduced meals, that is an application process that is set by the state of California. All of this information is also entered and verified at school sites, and it is uploaded straight to the Department of Education. The fiscal department does not even have access to this data. It goes into a system called CalPADS. We don't even access this. And then our auditor takes a look at those every single year and tries to find, in all of the information that he looks at, tries to find areas where perhaps we're not doing that correctly. He's not found any of those. The third one has to do with COLA. That's our cost of living adjustment. Our COLA is proposed by the governor, and it is established by the state of California. We don't change the COLA. Whatever the COLA is that is reported out is what goes into our calculations. So the reason all of this is important is because we wanted to make sure that contingency language was based on 3 data points that no one within our district could manipulate. These are 3 data points that are part of state systems that have always existed. They go straight to the state of California, to the Department of Education. They are very clearly monitored by auditors, and there really isn't any interpretation or any ability for anybody on our staff to be able to go in and manipulate any of those. And so these are really the factors that are behind that contingency language that I shared on the last slide. So with that, I hope this has been helpful. I know it's been a little bit long, but there seem to be some real big questions that many parents have reached out to me about, and I wanted to make sure that this was clear. If you've got any further questions, please go ahead and send those to cbo@mdusd.org, and we'll see you again next week.